Welcome to What Resonates. This podcast is about tuning into energy, intuition, and what feels true for you. Each conversation invites you to notice what sparks curiosity and feels aligned, opening a wider field of possibility for yourself and for humanity. Keep tuning in and follow What Resonates. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Andrea Kennedy, your host here at What Resonates. If you have ever wanted to learn Reiki in person, I'll be in the United Kingdom this June. Make sure to reserve your seat at mainstreamreiki.com. And if the UK is a little outside your neighborhood or the time just doesn't work for you, you can join me in my live online classes with other students from around the world. I hope to see you in class and take action with you to help bring more light into our world. Hello and welcome. It's Andrea, and I have a very fascinating guest with me today. His name is Peter McLaughlin, and he's a certified hypnotherapist and life coach. Peter helps people reprogram subconscious patterns to support real life change, including healthier relationships, better sleep. Who could not use better sleep? I mean, I'm right there. I'm right there with you there, Peter. I can't wait to have this conversation. Pain relief, confidence, and releasing old emotional pain. He specializes in past life regression and between lives regression. Peter came to this work after a leukemia diagnosis and has been practicing hypnosis for about 20 years now, since 2006. And I'm really interested to have this conversation because I'm so into the mind and the body and of course the spirit all coming together. I think so many more people are coming on board with that and the power of the mind and just new frontiers. And this has been around for a long time, but I think people are at a point where they're just more open to it, I think. And the fact that we can communicate like this with each other, you and I, but also with the audience and on platforms all around the world, we can talk about these things, which normalizes it and I think sparks even more curiosity. So thank you so much, Peter, for being here and being willing to, see what resonates with our audience.
Well, thank you, Andrea. I appreciate the invitation to be here and look forward to talking to you today.
Yes, absolutely. And so let's dive right in. So what really piqued my interest when I first came across you is this diagnosis of leukemia. And I think a lot of us can relate to, if it isn't us, it's someone in our family with a diagnosis that's a big one, a life-changing kind of diagnosis. And that's a pivotal point for people, I think, because there can be a lot of fear, a lot of unknowns, and it can be scary. And so I just wanted to ask you that moment, your path changed.
hmm
If you could just talk a little bit about that, about um, how did you get from that moment of diagnosis
hmm
to helping people with hypnosis?
Yeah, it's a great question. My children were little at the time, and I immediately went into denial and thought, this can't be real. I was volunteering to be a firefighter in the town in which I lived in Connecticut. And I kind of demanded that they do the test again, which they did, and the results came back the same way. And I felt myself, especially in retrospect, moving through these different stages, like denial and bargaining and anger, like the states that people go through when somebody close to them passes away. And yes, there was a lot of fear. And I went to a hematologist oncologist twice, which was one time too many because on the first visit, she said, we don't know what causes this and we don't know how to cure it. And I just, this was also in the wake of 9/11. And I was identifying with being a firefighter. I worked in Lower Manhattan on Wall Street at that time of 9/11. And there was advice. This one day I was watching this terrorism expert giving advice, and he was talking about how important it is to understand your adversary as much as you can, how that helps with the fear, how preparing yourself helps with the fear, how taking action, those 3 steps takes with the fear. And I basically grabbed onto that in a sense, and I applied it to leukemia. I was also diagnosed on the same day with Lyme disease, and in comparison, it was like the Lyme disease, "Oh, well, whatever." It was the cancer diagnosis that really got my attention. And I thought, "I'm gonna have to figure this out," because the hematologist oncologist, she was at the time, she was probably my age. I could see pictures of little kids in the background. She has a lot of patients. How much time can she spend on me? And so as I researched all of this, I went from the purely physical cause and effect into the power that the mind has over the body. And the shorter version of the story is that's what led me to being a hypnotherapist, because we work in the province of the subconscious mind, which controls the body.
Did you go to a hypnotherapist yourself?
No, I didn't. But I was explaining this to somebody the other day, how my grandfather, with whom I was very close, I really admired the fact that this guy was athletically very gifted, but he was also an intellectual seeker. And he used to quote Emile Coué, who was a famous French hypnotist from the 1920s. And some of your viewers maybe can resonate with this phrase of his, which is each day in every way I'm getting better and better. That was his famous autosuggestion um, phrase. And my grandfather used to talk about this with me, and he would talk about the power of the mind. And for me, everything just kind of came together at the same moment. During maybe a 2.5 to 3 year period between diagnosis and getting trained. And I can't tell you exactly why. Maybe it was my grandfather's influence. Maybe it was things I'd read about hypnotherapy, but I just knew it. It was an intuitive knowing that this was the right path for me.
You obviously got better. What happened with the
Yeah,
leukemia?
well, there's two answers to that question. One is the conventional answer, which is, what are my blood markers? So my blood markers are, my white blood cell count is still high, higher than it should be, but it's less than half of what it was when I was diagnosed. When I was diagnosed and I asked how long I had to live, they said maybe 10 years. And that's 23 years since I was diagnosed. The other way of answering this question is the way human beings have always answered questions prior to all of these diagnostic tests in the last 100 years. And that is, how do you feel? And I can tell you for sure, I feel better now at 63 than I did when I was diagnosed at 41. So
Huh.
I feel strong, I feel healthy, I feel energetic. Um, and I don't think that, even though the numbers are elevated, that this is a life-threatening problem for me anymore. I think it was when I was diagnosed.
Oh, that is quite interesting. Yeah, you mentioned all of those stages
Mhm.
and yeah, grief, right? And it was
Yes.
grief for the life that you thought you'd live.
Yep, and it was all the fear of what I thought I might lose,
Hmm.
and there was a lot of anger that came up in
Yeah.
those moments. Yeah, it really was. I felt like I was stepping onto an odyssey,
Mm.
that I was Odysseus in Homer's famous epic, going on this grand adventure filled with thrills and chills and terrors and yeah,
Unknown.
yeah, unknown.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of people can relate to that regardless, of what they've been through in their lives, because when we don't know what's coming, ooh, that can be quite frightening. Um, I wanted to talk to you then about your work. We've had some other hypnotherapists on the show before and other regressionists too. And I want to get your take on something. Now, you have a YouTube channel, and it's quite popular. There are, when I looked, about 130,000 subscribers.
Mhm.
And when I noticed that you had all those videos about weight loss on your channel to help people with that, I thought to myself, wow, he must get a lot of requests for that. It's very, very popular. And then that made me think back probably about 30 years. I took the Silva method. It was Silva mind control is what they used to call it, and they've changed the name. But way back then, so about 30 years ago when I took that class, that was a major theme in that class. And it seems like not a lot has changed. That is one of at the top of the list for people. And just being on the planet for as long as we have, we know, right? There's this diet and this way of eating and that and all the things. And then, we could go on and on. You know, they say eat this and not that, and then in 10 years they were wrong and they switch it. So we have all of that to wade through.
Mhm.
But there are also some very deep patterns that influence weight. And I want to spend some time on this because I think a lot of people at some point in their life, weight is important to them, whether it's for health reasons or they uh, maybe it's self-esteem, maybe any number of things. And I'm just going to quit talking and I want to just turn it over to you and ask you, what are you seeing in your practice, and what's underneath the surface for a lot of people? What are the most common causes, and how do you deal with it?
Okay, it's a great question, and I would say that in the main, the most common reason for, you know, eating habits that lead to a person being overweight, for example, has to do with using food as a drug, essentially. And my belief about any kind of an addiction is that the addictive substance or behavior is distracting the person who's engaging in it from some type of pain. It could be spiritual, emotional, psychological, physical, or some combination thereof. And while they're engaged in this kind of behavior, it's as I said, a distraction out of the pain. And I think food, in some respects, is the most widely used, and in quotation marks, because it's not technically a drug, but the most widely used method to soothe, to distract, to give pleasure. And when I work with people, whether it's on a weight issue or they're drinking wine every night, or they're smoking marijuana every day, or they're shopping too much, or I was working with a doctor recently that had a gambling problem. I'm always interested in what is the root cause? What's causing this? Not the symptom. The symptom is just a signpost telling us that something deeper needs to be addressed. Just like in your car. If your car is making a weird noise or if there's smoke coming out of the engine, that's not the problem. It's an indication of the problem. So that's where I place my focus with that client, is uncovering what's underneath the hood, if you will. What's driving this? And people will say things like the one thing that somebody said to me years ago that I thought was really interesting. I think it was in a testimonial, was I went for Peter for weight. I had no idea that I would resolve so many other things, because the weight really was just a symptom of what I'm saying, these deeper wounds, let's call them.
So I have a question though, because I think some people have weight issues that don't use food as a drug. Is that true?
Oh yeah, I would think so. I mean, they it could be metabolic. I mean, metabolic syndrome in this country is off the charts. For most of
Right.
my life, I did not have any weight issues. I said before, I'm 63, almost 64 at the end of this month. And I would say for the last 10 years or so, up until maybe 6 months ago, I had an extra 15 pounds on my stomach, and I couldn't get rid of it. And it was metabolic syndrome, which, you probably know, many in your audience may know. It has to do with insulin and becoming, you're no longer sensitive to insulin.
Mm.
And it turns out that it's basically what kind of food are you eating and when are you eating it? And so, yeah, that's another component which confounds a solitary approach. So when I work with people, part of, and I'm sure all of the other guests you've had do the same thing, part of the intake is really understanding who's in the room with me, whether it's virtual or in person, and what is their story, what's going on for them. Because you're right, if it's not being driven by, like, I'm eating too much and I know it, and I'm eating crap food and I know it, then it probably is one of these other things like what I was dealing with, which was this metabolic syndrome, for example. So yeah,
Right,
I don't think there's a one size fits all
right.
for people because the
And
person could be dealing with metabolic syndrome and they could be dealing with um, old traumas, and they could be dealing with present life where they're working too much or they're in a crappy relationship or what they perceive to be as a crappy relationship. And all of these things are like a hairball in a cat's throat. And
yeah,
it has to be deconstructed. It has to be deconstructed before it can be resolved.
yes. And that's, I can totally see that. And then I want to take a little bit of a sidestep here too, though, because what about past lives? Can a person have weight issues in this life where they're doing everything correctly, in quotes? And, and both of us are not doctors or whatever. So, we're just having a
Don't listen to us. Yeah.
conversation.
Talk to your
Yeah.
doctor.
Yeah. So we're just having a friendly conversation. But can somebody be doing all the so-called healthy things and then still have an influence of an energetic nature that makes them overweight?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and yes, it could stem from a past lifetime. So, if you starve to death in a past lifetime, your subconscious mind might essentially be saying, "We're not gonna allow that to happen again, and we're
Right.
gonna add on extra pounds so that when the famine happens, when the war happens, when the breadwinner dies, when the access to food goes away, you're still gonna have some reserves upon which you can draw." So sure, yeah. I mean, and the subconscious mind can create virtually anything it wants, despite what you're doing. So people who get on certain pharmaceuticals for, let's say, a psychological condition, if the subconscious mind, for whatever reason, wants that person's attention, suddenly the pharmaceutical doesn't work anymore. Everybody knows someone, if not themselves, where that's occurred. Oh yeah, it worked great for 5 years, 10 years, and then boom, stop working. There's a doctor. He's deceased now, and his specialty was back, neck, and shoulder pain. His name was Dr. John Sarno, and he wrote like 3 bestsellers for the New York Times. And he explained, these are his words, not mine, how ultimately, I think it was 97% of all back, neck, and shoulder pain is ultimately emotional. And I remember reading this one passage on the beach and sitting up and saying to my wife, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And he talked about how the subconscious mind, in an instant, can shut off the oxygen supply to any part of the body, and the person will immediately feel pain. How many people, it happened to me when I was totally stressed out when my kids were little and I was diagnosed and working and whatever, where you reach over to pick up a feather, you know, or, or a check or something like that, and boom, there goes the back. It wasn't the feather. It wasn't that the feather was too heavy. That's Sarno's point of view. So it's just another way of saying that the subconscious mind is in control of your autonomic nervous system. And it can do whatever it wants and needs to do based upon its agenda. And the way
Yeah.
I like to describe this to people is imagine that you are the conscious mind, you and your physical body. And you are riding on top of a giant war elephant. And that elephant, you want the elephant to go right, but there's water there, and the elephant doesn't want to go in the water. You can't prevent it from turning left. It's so much more powerful than you. And the essence of this work is getting the subconscious mind updated so that it's in harmony with the conscious mind. Because the subconscious has no concept of time, it doesn't recognize that something that happened to you in a past lifetime is no longer a clear and present danger. To the subconscious, that's like a tiger that's charging at you. And it doesn't care whether it happened yesterday, it happened 30 years ago, or it happened 3 lifetimes ago. If that fear gets triggered, it will behave as if.
Yes. And I just had to smile when you brought up Dr. Sarno. The Mind Body Prescription.
Yes.
That's right. Yes, that was his book. Well, the book that I'm familiar with. And
Mhm.
I think that that was just revolutionary. And
Mhm.
he wrote that book based on his findings decades ago.
Mhm.
And I am all about that book. So it's Dr. Sarno is his name, Sarno, for anybody listening. And it can change your life just actually reading the book.
Mhm.
I have talked with people who read the book, and by the end of the book, their pain was gone because the insights that you have just mentioned, uh, him pulling that curtain back
Mhm.
is enough that when a person processes that in their mind and they open up to that truth and
Yep.
possibility, they actually have healing happen.
Yes. It
It's
can happen. Yep.
remarkable.
It is
Yeah.
remarkable. And what Sarno said specifically was that the subconscious is trying to suppress old, painful, emotional trauma and memories of that. It doesn't want the person to experience even the memory of it.
Mhm.
And we're, again, to the subconscious, everything is now. So it suppresses that old memory and it produces the pain, in his words, just like I used about an addiction, to distract the person through pain. And it's not like it wants the person to feel pain. It doesn't. It just believes that that's better, a better option than letting this old, painful, emotional material come to the surface. But as we know, if you wake up in the morning and your right big toe hurts, your first thing is going to be to look at it. You're going to sit on the side of the bed and look at it. If you see a splinter in there, you're going to know instinctively exactly what has to happen. That splinter has got to come out. And no one's going to tell you that by sterilizing a needle and digging it out, that that's not going to be painful. It is. But everyone knows that when that comes out, now that wound can heal itself. And I believe the same thing is true about old traumatic incidents. They're like a splinter in the mind, and they exert their influence over a person until it gets excised, until it's healed or neutralized.
Yes, and I just wanna say this too, just about all of that was great, but I wanna highlight this, that he was a scientist and he imaged people. I mean, he studied this. It wasn't just a theory or something like that. And so I just want to put that out there. So people who are really wanting scientific studies and things like that, this book is for you as well. There's just so much there, and you're so right too, because it is just about to focus on something else, and it's so simple, and it's so surprising that it could be something so simple. It
Right, which
it
which also makes it empowering.
Mhm. Yes, yes. And so what does that mean then? So um, if somebody comes to you and let's say, if it's weight or something else, that they come with, what's the first thing you do? I mean, is there a certain path that you take?
Yep.
Is it regression? Is it just talking to them? How what's your approach like?
Good question. The first thing is talking. And talking serves two purposes. One is that it helps me understand who this person is that's in front of me. And I've trained myself over the last 20 years to listen for patterns. As human beings, we run patterns. Most of them are very positive, but some are very negative. And it's important for me to understand if there's a pattern there because something very powerful created that pattern. And the pattern's probably leading them into a direction they ultimately don't want to go. Also, the choice of words, the language that they use. I have a client right now who didn't come to me for back pain, but it's one of his issues. And he came to me for an addiction. But in his language, he talks about things that happened to him in the past. And he literally said, that broke my back. That was the language that he used. And the subconscious mind is also literal. It doesn't understand the negative clause. I don't want
Right.
to be in pain anymore. It just hears pain. And to make sense of the word pain, your mind has to create some kind of image of pain. So he used that. He said, and then he said at some other point when something terrible happened in his family, he said, that broke my back. And he's saying it kind of unconsciously, just in a stream of consciousness. But
Yes.
it's important to hear that and to extract it, to understand what's making him tick. The
Yeah.
second purpose, and this gives me an idea, this talking, of how we're gonna do this. What's gonna be the blueprint in my mind of how we're gonna do this? The second thing that having a conversation does is it builds rapport, because you can't ask a person to divulge really painful, difficult things to you, or to travel sort of with you in their mind to difficult things if they don't trust the person that's with them, that's helping to guide them. So that's step number one. Step number two is an idiomotor tool. So kind of like kinesiology or muscle testing, I have all of my clients use a pendulum. I have them hold it in their hands. And a pendulum is really just an amplifier of what the body is saying. And your body is a feedback mechanism. You know you're in pain because you feel it. You know you're in emotional pain because you feel it. You know you're feeling good or you like someone because why? You feel it. And so the body is always talking to us. We're just so disconnected and divorced from our bodies in this culture that people largely only recognize what the body's saying when they're in ecstasy or pleasure, or when they're frightened or angry. A pendulum helps us understand what the body's saying at all the other times. And you can calibrate, and I do this with every one of my clients, that they're holding this pendulum, which looks kind of like this. It's a weighted object at the end of, in this case, a small chain or a string or a piece of dental floss. And I just have them think and say in their mind, yes, 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 show me yes. And that pendulum will begin to move in a particular direction that feels outside of their conscious control, because the subconscious controls the autonomic nervous system. And then I'll have them do the same thing for a no, and they'll get a different motion. And a lot of times it freaks them out, but it's nothing magical. It's just the body responding to thoughts, because the mind and the body are connected. Once we've established the yes and the no, and we've done some other things to, as I say, calibrate it and make sure we're getting accurate answers, now we start we start searching for the root cause to whatever the symptom is that they walked in with. So, did this addiction, was it created for the very first time earlier in your present life? If we get a no, we know it's a past life. And because the
Oh.
client is holding the pendulum, they don't have to worry that it's going through me and my filter.
Oh.
So,
Hmm.
once we've collected the the information that we want, in other words, basically root cause, then we get a level of acuity with the pendulum. Is the intensity or the emotional impact of this incident a 7 or greater out of 10? Once we know what the number is, we know, all right, do we need to go after this? In other words, if it's anything over like a 3 or a 4, we've got to go after it. If it's a 7, 8, 9, or 10, we know, all right, this is serious. This also allows us, after we've done the work on it, to come back to the pendulum and say, what is the level of intentional acuity at this point? What's the emotional impact at this point? And if it used to be a 10 and now it's a 0, we're done. We don't have to, we could wipe our hands of it. We don't have to worry about that particular trauma. In this instance, we said it was in a past life. And what we do is we keep working through things, and then we're also monitoring the symptoms that they came in for. So if suddenly, like in the case of this physician I was telling you about with the gambling issue, he tells me he doesn't feel the need to do that anymore, which is consistent with what we found with the pendulum, both on the way in, that's the reason, and the way out, which is now the emotional intensity of it is down to a 0, a 1, or a 2. And we start knocking these things down.
Yeah, I find that a bit different, that you would have them use a pendulum. That's a pretty different approach. Were you trained that way, or did you
No,
come to that yourself?
I came to it myself. And part of the reason I came to it myself is I told you that when I was diagnosed with leukemia and Lyme disease on the same day, I went to a hematologist oncologist twice. That was one time too many, because they said, we don't know why you have it, how it's caused, and we don't know how to cure it. I found my way to a naturopathic physician, and I learned about the difference between allopathy, which is what our MDs are. They're allopathic physicians, which means managing symptoms, basically, the alleviation of a symptom. And a naturopath is more of a root cause person, but they're focused on the body. And their philosophy is if you have a disease, it's because you have poison in your body and or you don't have specific building blocks, nutrients that you need, or maybe it's both. And I realized, oh, it's the same thing with your mind. If you have emotional toxins in your mind and the mind and body are connected, that's going to affect your body. And the naturopath that I found that we became actually friends used kinesiology. She used muscle testing. So I'm 6'3". At the time I was 41. She was probably in her 50s and she was like 5'2". And I put my arm out and she said, hold it as steady and strong as you can. Resist my pressure. She used one or two fingers and put different vials in my other hand against my chest. And for the most part, I had no trouble resisting her pressure. But then I put a certain vial in my hand and I just went weak. I went weak. I went weak. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Well, the pendulum is the same thing. And so that's where I kind of pulled these together. And then I pulled together something called havening, which you may or may not be familiar with, which is very similar to EMDR, that rapid eye movement, right? So you can reprocess trauma in the brain using something called EMDR. Well, there's something else called havening, which is even easier and even more straightforward. And I learned just by creativity and just working that you can combine havening, the pendulum, and hypnosis all together.
Can you explain havening a little bit more and spell it?
It's spelled Havening,
Ah,
and
just like it
and
sounds.
that
Okay.
that functions in the same way from my vantage point. And again, we both said we're not doctors, so don't trust us. With EMDR, which is rapid eye movement. And when I've done EMDR on the client side, you're just following a ball as it travels across a screen. And you've got a target, which is an old trauma in your mind. And you just said at the beginning of this broadcast, you were trying to remember something and you looked up and to the right and you said, well, that's how I remember things. Well, yeah, because your brain and your eyes are connected to each other. And you
Mm,
can
right.
tell sometimes what somebody's thinking about based upon eye movement. Is the eye going up and to the left, up and to the right? Is it going side to side or is it going down? And that indicates that they're processing certain kinds of memories. Either they're constructing a memory or they're remembering something that actually happened. And that could be a visual memory, it could be an auditory memory, or they could be having feelings, right? So
Hmm.
EMDR is tapping into, and havening is tapping into this connection between the eyes and the brain. So you can with havening, you do some kind of tapping. So it could be this, and
Hmm.
at the same time you're blinking your eyes as fast as you can. But the setup to it is actually more important than what the client is doing, which is you're using the pendulum to identify what specifically is the trauma that is related to the symptom. And then you're you're having the client close their eyes and then you're bringing them back to that incident in their mind. Their mind will go to that incident. And when they're there, you start eliciting aspects of it like, are you first person or third person? Is there a dominant color in the scene? Do you hear anything? Tell me essentially what's going on. Are you in a particular kind of room? And what's going on in your body? Because remember, your body's a feedback mechanism. How is your body responding to this memory or this scene in your mind? Once I have that all written down, now I have them do the processing with the havening. And it could be this, or I have them tapping on their thighs, blinking their eyes. And then after 30 seconds, I check back in and say, okay, what's happening now? Has anything changed? And every single time, things will be changing. So it may be that the person is moving farther away from the scene. It may be that the scene is getting sort of dim or cloudy and it's harder for them to make it out. It could be that in the scene, they went from first person to third person. It could be that the first person who was 8 years old is now 28 years old or 48 years old. But the mind, when given the opportunity and coached in the right way, will create a resolution to what happened in the past. And as soon as somebody starts the tapping and blinking, as soon as you start asking them, even beforehand, exactly what's going on in that scene, they will, by definition, enter hypnosis. So whatever I say to them will be accepted by the subconscious mind. So when they're doing the processing, I'll be delivering hypnotic suggestions to them based primarily around the autonomic nervous system, which either registers something as safe or not safe. The only reason somebody's going to be here is because they've got memories from the past that the autonomic nervous system is still registering as not safe. So part of what I'm delivering to them is, you are safe, you are safe, you are safe. I am safe, I am safe, I am safe. All of that is over, finished, done, and completed. You have survived that and survived it beautifully. Now it's time to let it go. You're safe to let it go. You're safe, you're safe, you're safe, while they're doing the processing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about how the hypnosis comes in to that.
Well, that's one of the
Yeah,
ways. And
yeah.
what I would say too is that hypnosis is a tool. Neurolinguistic programming is a tool. Coaching is a tool. Havening is a tool. EMDR is a tool. These are all just tools. And ultimately, the tool that the carpenter uses, or the tools the carpenter uses when you hire them to build a deck on the back of your house, is irrelevant to you. And the ones they use from their perspective is, what's right for this job. I'm not just going to say, I'm a sawyer and I only use a saw. Like, no, I've got all kinds of tools with me. I'm going to use the tool that is right for the job. So there are times when havening is not appropriate, when it doesn't work. And it's better to move right into hypnotic regression at that point. But
Mm.
throughout my career, I have always been trying to simplify things for myself because I'm constantly confronted with complex problems. And if I can simplify the solution, it is that much easier. I want things to be simpler and move through them faster for my clients.
Do you think that people in general have changed in their ability to succeed at going through this process with you and have the results?
Yes. And I think you indicated one of those changes before, which is you were talking about how you think people are more open to what is called alternative methods. And I think that is for sure that's been happening, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, based on what happened over the last 5 or 6 years. That even if you look at polling data, that trust in allopathic MDs, doctors, has gone from 70% to 40%.
Mm.
That indicates to me that people are losing faith in the conventional approaches. And again, I'm not telling people that they should do something or should not do something. This is just for information. So if they're losing faith in the conventional sources, it makes sense to me that they would be searching for other answers. And just like me, going to a hematologist, oncologist twice, and they say, we don't know what causes this. We don't know how to cure you. It's like, well, I've got to look elsewhere. That was the only thing that made any sense to me. So that's one big change. The other big change is on the other side, which I will say is a disempowering change. I look out over the culture, and at my age, I see, wow, college students are receiving trigger warnings for classic novels. Page 301 has the depiction of X, and we don't want you to be troubled by reading it, as if this person will fall apart if they read something. It's treating them like like a small child or something. It's treating them like they're very weak. And I believe the exact opposite of us as humanity. Our ancestors went through untold struggles and difficulties for us, you and me, to be here right now. We are imbued with their DNA. We are imbued with probably factors that go beyond how we understand it with DNA, right? Their spiritual energy probably vibrates inside of us. And so I think that part of a person's journey is to be encouraged to step into their power, to not run away from things, but to face them. Kind of like that terrorism expert was talking about that I grabbed onto. When run away from our fears, they get bigger, they get worse. When we confront them, they tend to get smaller. And I'm talking specifically about the things that are inside our mind. I'm not telling you at all to go and confront, an abusive partner or something like that. I'm talking strictly right now about the fears that we have inside of our mind, which are legion. If you're like me and you've been diagnosed with, something serious, that's a big fear. But when you
Oh,
confront it, like the wizard in The Wizard of Oz, it tends to get smaller. You tend not to be as afraid of it anymore. And this is what
yeah.
Joseph Campbell talked about in his book about the hero's journey. That every human being is on a hero's journey. That this is the base myth at the root of every single culture on the planet when he studied it. And part of the hero's journey is having a fall at some point and being terrified to go back, to get back on the horse. And will do anything. The hero will do anything to not get back on the horse. But eventually, he or she has to get back on the horse. And when he or she does, they are not only successful, but they grow. They become stronger and more capable. They take a step up on a much bigger spiritual ladder. And that is my belief about humanity, not just me, but all of us. And I deeply and passionately, as you can tell, want to help my clients stand in their power.
Yeah, and when you mentioned the trigger warning thing, if it said that there was a thing on page 133, oh, I'd be turning to page 133. I don't know about you, but it's like, "Oh, really? There's
Yeah,
something
how
good
fast
there?"
can I get there? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just turning to that, you know?
Yep.
And I wonder how many people, listening to us right now would do the same thing. I just had to put that out there because, I'm all about that. I'm all about experience, and, even in my perception is even in the toughest of things, there is such great value in them. And, even in your story, going through that difficult time, look at what a foundation that provided for you, to fuel you into your own future that you navigated. So, um, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the woo woo side of things.
Mhm.
So,
Sure.
my word, not yours, but you talked about past lives a little bit.
Mhm.
And I totally get it. If we went through a famine or something like that, or some trauma, in a past life, that can come through cellular memory. It can come through, any number of ways, and we can be influenced by that. I totally get it. Um, Between lives, though,
Mhm.
what's happening between lives that would be influencing our behavior and our patterns in this life?
Okay, it's a good question. We're all eternal spirits, and we never really lose consciousness. And if you are curious about this, if you have doubts, which is natural, just go into YouTube and type in near death experience,
Mm,
NDE, and you'll hear hundreds, thousands of people from all walks of life discuss how they were clinically dead. They were hooked up to machines and they were clinically dead for a period of time, which means, according to science, no brain waves and no heartbeat. And these people will talk about a period of consciousness that they had where they were greeted by, say, in some cases, deceased relatives or by ascended masters or other beings of light. And they communicated with them. They were
mhm.
also aware of what was going on in the room where their body was. And they were able to tell people later everything that was said and done in that room. And they were able to also simultaneously have an awareness of loved ones in that moment. Because generally speaking, it's after you die in one lifetime and before you're born in the next one, you are experiencing the life between lives or the interlife period.
Right, and I totally get that, and we've had some, amazing, amazing, uh, guests and stories on the podcast too of people who've had near-death experiences and been dead for, remember Rosemary Thornton, a beautiful lady. She was dead 10 minutes and came back, and, Always love talking to Rosemary, but many people do also believe that there is in between the lives, there is planning that happens,
Yep.
before the next incarnation. But what
Yep.
my question really was what is happening in the in between that is informing your clients' issues that they're coming to you for help? Because I wouldn't really think that the between lives part w- might influence them in a negative way, and maybe it doesn't. I don't know. That's what I'm asking about.
Sure. Well, I don't think you're going to experience a trauma in the life between lives the way you would in a past life or in your present life.
Hmm.
However, one major purpose for doing an interlife regression would be to understand what agreements or
Oh, okay.
contracts have been entered into and with whom for the life you're living in right now. And whether those contracts or agreements are still in force, whether they're still in your highest and best interest to have in force. So the anecdote that comes into my mind immediately is having a client in deep hypnosis. She had a horrific relationship with her father. We have her in the life between lives phase, and we have her specifically in the pre-life planning session. You can almost think of like the way I imagine it in my mind is it's like there's a meeting room in a corporation somewhere, and your spirit guide is in there, and other key figures, some key figures from your present life, let's say, are in there, and there may be other beings like like elders in there, and you are being offered options and you're being counseled for choices to make before you are born into your next life. And in the case of this woman, she's going through this planning session and then suddenly she bursts out into tears, like racking sobs. And when the sobs begin to abate, I ask her, I said, what's going on? And she says, he doesn't want to do it. And what she's meaning is her father, the one she's had a horrific relationship with, doesn't want to take on that role. Now, this didn't come from me. This came from the client who, when we were talking, said, yeah, I'm estranged from him. We have a terrible relationship. He did some awful things to me. But in this life between lives, she's having this unbelievable insight that they are souls or spirits who are actually working together. And if you think about how drama works, you have no drama if you have no conflict.
Oh, right.
If Shakespeare or whoever wrote Shakespeare is correct, that all the world's a stage and all the men and women are merely players, then we come down here taking on these personalities. And that word actually comes from Greek drama, which was the mask that the actors wore. That's the personality. That's the person. Or the persona. That's the person. We take on these personalities and we play these parts. And we get so invested in them that we forget who we really are. We forget that we're actors on a stage. We forget that we're eternal beings, eternal spirits. And in this upcoming play, the father was agreeing to take on the role of the antagonist, the villain. And he didn't want to do it. But she said, and this is not me interpreting it, she said he is agreeing to do it, but there are tears in his eyes too, because he doesn't want to do it. But he's doing
Right.
it from love. And like that was mind blowing.
Oh, yeah, I just love this whole topic too because, there's a book, it's a children's book by Neil Donald Walsh called The Little Soul in the Sun, I think, or The Little Soul and the Sun, I can't remember, but it's a beautiful book, and it is about this, and
Mhm.
we have to have contrast. This is the earth plane, and without contrast, we do not learn, we do not, have, tough things to go through and then have these beautiful rich experiences. And so and then it leads us to the next thing about victim
Yes.
and perpetrator. I mean, what are those really? It's from my perspective, everything's agreed to, and that's a big statement. but there's got to be some level of agreement. And I look at it because we're sovereign in our energy. I don't think we come here to the earth uh, with anything less than sovereignty, because it just wouldn't work. I don't know. What's your thought about that?
I completely agree with you, and I find that I have to operate sometimes on 2 planes simultaneously, to be aware of operating on 2 planes simultaneously. One is the human plane, which does involve right and wrong, which does
Yeah.
acknowledge the need for a criminal justice system, which does acknowledge the need for people to be defended, and for vulnerable people to be defended, and to be safe, and things like that, to have locks in your front door.
Right.
But to simultaneously have a spiritual awareness and understanding that, as you're saying, everything is happening for a reason. There are contracts and agreements that we have to learn, that everybody knows that we learn more from pain and struggle than we do from when everything's going perfectly. Everyone knows this. I don't think that there was ever a promise that this life was gonna be easy. Everything I understand is that we are all heroes for coming here in the first place,
Yes. Yes.
and that when we die and we cross over, we are greeted as such because everyone on the other side has been here. They know what this is like. This is not an easy place.
Right.
And my current belief about relationships is that of the 3, I think, again, but with the simplification thing, I think there are 3 main areas of each person's life. And I'm totally open to a fourth, but this is what I found. One is physical and mental health. 2 is your business, your purpose and finances. And 3 is relationship. Now, that could be with your parents, it could be with your kids, it could be with a friend. But I think we all know that your primary, let's call it romantic relationship, is, for most people, the most powerful. And it provides, I would argue, the most joy of those 3 buckets, and hence the most grief, sadness, anger, all these other things. So I love working with people on their principal relationships for this reason. And I don't think that the construct of this world in a macro sense, or the construct of a relationship in a micro, I don't think it's constructed to have no bugs. I think the bugs are the feature, because that's what induces us to get back on the hero's journey. That's what induces us to grow. If I hadn't been hit with the spiritual 2x4 of a leukemia and a Lyme disease diagnosis on the same day, I would have kept on keeping on. And I wasn't going down the right path for me. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think in relationships in particular, when we can move out of the victim mentality, really, which is, if she changes in the following ways, then I will be happy. If he changes in the following ways, then I will be happy. Because you're disempowering yourself. You're saying
Mhm.
that that my happiness is in the hands of another person. And I really think that in relationships, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, the fights mean I have triggered something from your past.
Mm.
And then you, in turn, trigger something from my past. And when this happens, a much younger version of you comes forward. A much younger version of me comes forward, like a wounded 8-year-old and a wounded 6-year-old are now going at it. And all the thinking has gone from the executive functions of the prefrontal cortex back to the lizard brain. What hope do we have at this point?
Right.
I
Yes.
much prefer, when working with either individuals on relationships or couples, to focus, say, 80% of the attention on the individuals, on helping them clean up their side of the street, for 2 reasons. One is that no matter what happens with the relationship, this person's going to have more clarity. They're going to have more peace. They're going to be more in their place of power. And the second reason is based on physics. Every action causes an equal and opposite reaction. When I bring a different me back into the relationship, doesn't that change our dynamic? Isn't our dynamic really a function of the energy that she brings and that he brings, in the case of, like my wife and me? And if one of them changes something for the better, doesn't the whole dynamic now shift? And then I think the other 20% are strategies. What do you do when you're activated?
Right.
You know, how
Yeah.
how do you how do you communicate with each other? How do you understand where the other person really what how they're wired versus how you're wired? So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm totally on board with you, Andrea, about this.
Yeah. It's funny because I went to math, when you said it's like, well, yeah, you change one coefficient in the equation, the whole answer is different. You don't have to, you know. But I think that that's, where we're really going, in our spirit. From where I sit, there's this spiritual awakening happening on the planet.
Mhm,
And um, I see more and more, and in my own work, I'm moved to the self. If we want to change the world, I think more people are waking up to the truth that if we want to change the world, we change ourselves. And that's what we can change. That's where the magic is. And just like what you're talking about, then everything that you're involved in, well, let me back up. Everything you're in relation with
mhm.
is then different because you are different. You're the common
Yeah,
denominator in everything in your life.
that's exactly right, and now, you talked about the technology that we have available to us, and this is just another tool that can be used for ill or it can be used for good, and so if you change where previously you might have been able to touch this small number of people in your physical little village or something, well, now you have this podcast
Mhm.
and you bring in guests and the audience grows over time and they touch people. So, this is why we came up with this concept of virality. Well, do we not have even more impact for good or ill when we are able to change ourselves? Because what are you bringing to the world through this technology? Are you depicting more murders? Are you depicting more, violence and anger and hostility, or whatever it is, or are you bringing forward something else? A different kind of energy to inspire people or help them heal or learn something that they didn't know that may change something in their mind.
So exciting, isn't it?
It is. It's very exciting. Yeah. Well, and I think you and I, all of us here right now, we all chose to be here at this time. In fact, there was this one day when I meditate every day and I meet with my guides. I meet with my spirit guide, I meet with Jesus, I meet with Mary, I meet with Angel Michael, two deceased dogs, sometimes my uncle. And this one day, I was on my high horse and I said to them, "Why is this planet such," and I used an expletive, crap hole. And and they immediately answered and they said, "A, you chose to come here. And B, they said, when you watch a movie, you pay money to watch movies with the same kind of violence and conflict that you're complaining about. So don't come to us with this.
Yeah.
Like, take responsibility here. You're part of this."
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's spitting some truth right there.
Yeah. And I'm gonna take it one more a little further too, Peter, and that's in all your past lives, you helped create this moment. So
Yes.
even beyond
Yeah.
this lifetime,
Yeah.
you helped weave the fabric that we are all wrapped in right now.
I love
And
that.
I did, and everybody
Yeah.
else here. So all of
Yep.
the people complaining about that person or that group, the others, whatever it is, you know what? We're all one.
We
We
are.
we
We
really
are. And
are.
you were talking about scientifically minded people. And for those people who are oriented that way, and I think that's great, the uncertainty principle, this scientific understanding that a particle that's observed behaves differently than a particle that is not observed. Wow. Like
Yeah.
our thoughts
Yeah.
are
It is.
affecting material reality. And we know that's true. Just like we know epigenetics is true, that we can control our gene expression through our thoughts. We know these things are true, but we put them in these little boxes off to the side because it doesn't fit neatly into the current paradigm. So the placebo effect, it's another one. And that one's been known for a long time. And when that comes up, people will say, it's just the placebo effect. It's only the placebo effect, as though it's like this icky thing that messes up our testing,
Yeah.
when really it's this enormous capability people have, for example, to heal themselves.
Yep. Yep.
Sham knee surgery is just as effective as the real thing. What?
I know, but it's only the placebo effect.
Yeah, it's
I know.
only.
Yeah, I can't remember the guest that I was talking to, and we talked about this. I think it was Dr. Shamini Jan, and yeah, I'm pretty sure it was her. Anyway, we were talking about the placebo effect, and yeah, give it to me every day. I mean, I'll take it. If we're just interested in the results, then who cares? Who
Exactly.
cares?
Who
It
it should be harnessed, in other words,
Yes, it
rather than
absolutely should,
rejected and pushed away. The
because
the
it
the language.
demonstrates the power of the mind.
Yep, yep. The other part of our language that reminds me of this is how the imagination is treated. So, imagination, I'm gonna say, is an umbrella term under which comes creativity, insight, epiphany, and this is the reason why we're not still living in caves. This is the reason we have this technology. This is the reason that we can fly an aircraft. This is the reason that we have these devices in our hands where we can communicate with anyone on this earth and see them at the same time. Because someone could imagine it before it was a physical reality. And yet, that's also in our language. It's just your imagination.
Right.
It's only a dream, as if
Yeah.
we should push it away when it's your greatest power.
Yes.
And
Yep.
I have to wonder, honestly, as a student of history, I have to wonder if, well, let me say this, that rulers have always wanted to rule over other people, that they have always wanted to expand and hold on to their power, and that knowledge is power, and that divide and conquer is a thing. And so if you have knowledge and understanding of how things really work, and you prevent other people from understanding that, either by withholding it from them or ridiculing it or punishing people through censorship or worse, and you hold this for yourself, well, that may be part of the reason why we have this language. It's all in your head. It's just a dream. It's only your imagination because it weakens people during
Mhm.
their weekdays, Monday through Friday, weekdays, during their weekend, Saturday and Sunday, which is also weakened. You've been weakened on Saturday and Sunday for your weekdays, Monday through Friday. This is not an accident, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, but it's
It's not a,
spelled differently, so it must mean something else. I'm just
well, and
kidding.
there's another word I was just about to say. Children learn how to spell. They engage in spelling
Oh, right.
because
Mhm.
words are magic. We
Yes.
create with our words. We
Mhm.
create, and our words are a representation of our thoughts, and our words influence our thoughts. And someone came up with weekend and weekdays. Do we think that that's a mistake? People drink uh, alcohol, also known as spirits. If you can be under the influence of alcohol, then linguistically and by definition, you can be under the influence of spirits. We
Yep.
are in a spiritual world. There's what's the name of that movie? I always forget the name of that movie about Jim Carrey is born into a TV show, basically. His whole life
Oh,
is a
right.
TV show.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, I know the
Anyway,
show.
he's basically convinced that, like like the man in Plato's cave, that his universe is this tiny, tiny, tiny little box. And like the man in Plato's cave, he begins to find his way out of the box and understand that the wool has been pulled over his eyes about what is real, what is truth. And I firmly believe that to be true about all of us. And whoever made that film and Plato, who wrote the allegory of the cave, they were trying to tell us
Yes.
all is
Yeah.
not what you're being told it is. And people come to this realm when they have become frustrated with the other realm, when it cracks open a little bit, when there's been some kind of, in the words of The Matrix, which is another movie telling us how things work, when they have been red pilled, through some kind of a crisis.
Yeah. So much to think about. And Peter, I think we could just keep on talking, but
Probably.
gosh, I know. It's been fun. Um, Golly. Is there one thing you want to make sure that our audience remembers or knows before we point them to your website so they can connect with you?
Yes, I'm going to follow up on the theme I was just talking about, because the other side of that is trust yourself. You have an intuition. You have a way of discernment. You have a way of understanding that goes beyond your five physical senses. And you were imbued with this. You were given this by your creator. And you have the ability to learn about it, to practice it, to foster it, to get it to a place where it becomes a real part of your life. And I think as we move deeper into AI, there's going to be no way of discerning through our five physical senses what is real and what is fabricated. But this deeper part of us, in many respects, I think represents our access to the truth. And it's ours. It's not yours, it's not mine. It belongs to each one of us as individuals. And this is a key part of our inherent power. And I would encourage people to think about this, to lean into this, because you've been taught to ignore it. And yet it can guide you home.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I totally see that, feel that, know that. So thank you so much for stating it so clearly. And when people want to reach out, find out more about your work and all that fun stuff, where can they do that?
My website is the easiest one, blueskyhypnosis.com. And then I have a YouTube channel that you mentioned, also called Blue Sky Hypnosis, that has 250 plus pieces of content, much of which is like guided hypnosis for different issues.
Nice. Oh, I love that. Yeah, YouTube is just great. And
Mhm.
I think it's the platform to be, out of all of them. But I don't know. I'm a little biased on that. But I just think that it's a place where you can find just about anything.
I would
So
agree.
a place of exploration. And then we can use our discernment, right? As
Yes.
what
Yes.
resonates with us.
Yes. Yes. It's the Wild West. There's everything there.
There is, that's for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thank you so much for being here, Peter. It's been fun. I really enjoyed meeting with you.
Me too. Thanks for the invitation and for the conversation.
Thank you for tuning in. Keep trusting your truth, keep listening to your inner wisdom, and keep following what resonates. To sign up for the newsletter, leave a review, or connect, visit whatresonatspodcast.com. You'll also find everything linked in the show notes.